Okay, now, video 3, moving on to the pancreas. So the pancreas is both endocrine and exocrine. So what's the difference? Endocrine means that you're keeping, it's an internal signaling. Exocrine is secreting, yes, into an area, but in this case, exocrine secretions are going to be going out into the duodenum of the small intestine. Okay, so when we're dealing with the endocrine component, there are basically a few different hormones that we're going to be talking about. The alpha cells are producing glucagon. Glucagon itself is going to be targeting the breakdown of glycogen, usually in the liver, but it can also break down glycogen in skeletal muscle and in stored fat and adipose tissue. So glycogen is going to be asking your cells to break down glycogen to increase blood glucose levels. So this is what happens when you have low blood sugar. On the other hand, the beta cells are going to be making insulin, and we're very familiar, most people are familiar with insulin. What insulin does is it triggers the absorption or the uptake of glucose into cells, be it skeletal muscle, epithelial cells, liver, adipose tissue, to absorb that glucose or uptake the glucose and either use it for cellular metabolism or to store the glucose as glycogen. So increased insulin means that you're going to have increased glycogen synthesis in the tissues that take up the glucose. And what that does is it's meant to decrease circulating levels of blood sugar. There's another type of hormone produced called somatostatin. And somatostatin is a growth factor, and sometimes it inhibits processes. For now, and that's made in the delta cells, which not a lot of people talk about. So you should know the different cells, alpha, beta, delta, and the hormones that they produce within the pancreas. And the pancreas is this kind of long tail-shaped organ that sits kind of inferior and slightly behind, posterior to the stomach, and it's adjacent to the duodenum component of the small intestine. So basically, you're going to see these little regions here, these little ducts that connect to the pancreas that's going to allow the release, the exocrine release of digestive enzymes like trypsinogen, pancreatin, things like that. And those are going to help in digestion of compounds, biomolecules that come in through the food that we eat, down out of our stomach and into this first segment of the duodenum. You know, I thought I would try a different color, and the purple I don't think is working so well. So let's try orange next. See how that goes. Moving on to the ovaries and the testes. The ovaries and the testes are basically organs that you don't necessarily need to survive. The reproductive system is about the only system that an organism doesn't need to survive, but it is necessary for the survival of the species, for the population. So we call the ovaries and the testes gonads, so it's gonadal tissue. And over here in our picture, you'll see that the male gonads, the testes, produce androgens, specifically testosterone, whereas the ovaries, they're going to produce estrogens. Now, the ovaries and testes both serve as an endocrine and exocrine gland. They reside within the pelvic cavity. The testes can react a little bit differently. They can be in the pelvic cavity or outside of the body. We'll get to the testes in a few minutes. In the ovaries are the site of oocyte maturation. And so what's happening is that the oocytes, the primary oocytes, are going to be responding to the follicle-stimulating hormone that's made where, you guys? Remember where FSH is made? Think about it for a minute. The follicle-stimulating hormone is inducing the maturation of the ovarian follicles. Eventually, the follicles themselves are going to start producing estradiol, which is a form of estrogen. And so that will help regulate and induce ovulation, and eventually the production of progesterone from the corpus luteum inside of the organ. So estrogens and progesterone have slightly different properties. Estrogens are going to be stimulating the ovarian follicle to mature. It also helps regulate the development and the maintenance of secondary sexual characteristics, so like enhanced fat distribution in the hips, enhances fat distribution in the breasts, and it also stimulates the growth of the uterine lining during one part of the luteal phase leading up to menses. That you guys are going to be talking about in physiology. Now, in terms of progesterone, progesterone is stimulated by the uterus. So when we look at a picture here of the gonads, the ovaries on the terminal ends, kind of in these little horn areas of the female reproductive system, and the uterus is this large kind of inverted pear-shaped organ. And the uterus is where, as most of us know, the offspring are developing, and that's where the baby sits while it's still growing inside the parent. And the progesterone stimulates the uterus to prepare for implantation. So again, this is something you guys are going to cover much more in physiology, but basically, as the uterus is producing progesterone, that's making the uterine lining kind of a healthy place for the fertilized egg to lodge and implant for the development of the offspring. It also increases the movement of the oocyte inside of the uterine tube, or the tube connecting the ovaries, the fallopian tube, into the uterus. So it allows a smooth transition for the fertilized egg to travel from the ovary, or from the edges of the fallopian tube, down into the uterus. Now, the testes are quite a bit different. They also have endocrine and exocrine function. The testes in a male is found in the scrotum when they're sitting outside of the body. They can be pulled back up closer into the body for a variety of reasons. They contain interstitial cells that are going to be producing testosterone mostly, but perhaps other androgens. Androgens are going to be male sex hormones, and it helps regulate sperm production, sperm maturation, helps release sperm for fertilization, helps maintain the male's reproductive system and male secretory glands, so that would also include the prostate. And testosterone also helps in male muscle growth, and so that's a part of inducing secondary sexual characteristics in males. It would be the increased muscle mass and also the production of thicker hair on the face and on different parts of the body. All right, so that's the reproductive system in a nutshell. We will be going over the male and female reproductive system in one of the units, Unit 4 or Unit 5, I forget which unit because we reorganized. So you'll see those portions in more detail later on in the semester. The thymus gland is an interesting gland. The thymus is localized right above the heart, right here. Oops. And the thymus, so it's in the thoracic cavity. It is posterior to the sternum, so it's covered by the sternal plate, and it secretes thymosin. And what thymosin is doing is it is inducing the maturation of lymphocytes. So lymphocytes are white blood cells. We haven't gone over that chapter yet, but basically what happens inside of a cell in the thymus is that you have a series of metabolic and chemical steps that allow cells to be converted to mature lymphocytes over a period of time, as long as thymosin is around. Am I going to ask you about the details of this on the exam? No, I'm not. This is all physiology, but I wanted you to see what a cell in the thymus might look like. So the thymus itself has a right and a left lobe. Each little region is a septate. You have right here, this would be one septa, this would be another septa, and each one of these little lumps is a lobule. And within the structure, you have, again, a cortex and a medulla. Remember what we talked about? The cortex is going to have kind of like a columnar organization, unlike the adrenals that have vertical columns like this of cells. You have lateral columns here, see? So here's region 4, the subcapsular layer. Region 3, where you're seeing the developing thymocytes. Region 2, where you have a series of trabeculae, which means kind of like looks kind of spongy, fingery. Remember the trabeculae in bones? And then region 1, right here, where you have hematopoietic precursors. These are stem cells that are going to be turning into lymphocytes eventually. Down here in the medulla, we have vascularization. So again, you're going to find vascularization in regions, not as a, I wouldn't say as a 100% rule, but a lot of times when you see medulla or you hear the word medulla, expect to find blood vessels there and kind of a more disorganized structure, something that you would expect to see secretion coming out of. Cortex, very organized, usually laminated laterally or vertically. The pineal gland. Now, you guys saw kind of the pineal when we did our brain dissection. The pineal gland is responsible for producing melatonin to help us sleep. So the pineal is way back here. The pineal gland in your sheep dissection, you might have been able to see it. There were some very small pineals that we were able to find. We did find one really good one. And so the pineal itself is attached to the bottom or the floor of the third ventricle, which is over here. It makes melatonin, and melatonin comes from serotonin, which is a neurotransmitter that gives you kind of a sense of well-being. And so what's going on here when melatonin is being produced is that, the serotonin, is that it's going to help induce the secretion of follicle-stimulating hormone, luteinizing hormone, or the synthesis of it to allow the maturation of, or to regulate, I guess you'd say to regulate the speed of the maturation of gametes. So you don't want gametes firing off all the time. You want to be able to regulate the speed of that because that's a very energy intensive process for the body. The pineal gland gets lots and lots of information from visual pathways. Those visual pathways gives you an idea of not only day length, all right, how much sunlight you get, but the intensity of sunlight. So it helps to set your circadian rhythm. It helps regulate your circadian rhythm. And so basically the idea is that as the day is coming to a close, the light intensity goes down, and that's going to increase the synthesis of melatonin from serotonin. That is going to downregulate gamete maturation and, at the same time, make you feel sleepy. Melatonin does not put you to sleep, but it does induce a sense of quiet, a sense of well-being, a sense of sleepiness. And so melatonin is a part of setting you into the process of going to sleep, which is a part of a circadian rhythm, which you will talk about much more in physiology. All right, so that was our last, that was our last slide for this particular lecture. Keep an eye out for the next chapter lecture, and I will see you soon. Bye-bye.